Tonight on Primetime, Vladimir Putin visits Beijing as Russia and China reinforce a partnership shaped by the war in Ukraine, energy ties, and a shifting global balance of power. Is a new global order emerging? Good evening. Russian President Vladimir Putin has met Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing with discussions focusing on trade, energy cooperation and the US-Iran conflict, as well as Ukraine, as Moscow and Beijing deepen their strategic partnership. Here's more from Beijing.
Russian President Vladimir Putin arrived in Beijing on Wednesday for high-level talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping during his 25th official visit. The occasion also marks the 25th anniversary of the Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation between Russia and China. Putin was welcomed with an official ceremony outside the Great Hall of the People before holding high-level talks with Xi. The Russian leader was accompanied by a large delegation that included deputy prime ministers, ministers, and senior business executives. The meeting came just days after US President Donald Trump visited China for separate talks with Xi amid the ongoing US-Iran conflict. Key topics on the agenda included bilateral relations, trade, the US-Iran war, energy cooperation, and the Ukraine conflict. The two leaders are expected to sign a joint statement and several cooperation agreements following the talks. Putin and Xi will also attend the opening ceremony of the Russia-China Years of Education 2026-2027. Putin is later expected to meet Chinese Premier Li Qiang for further discussions on trade and economic cooperation. Economic ties between Moscow and Beijing have expanded rapidly in recent years. Bilateral trade surpassed $240 billion in 2023, while China now purchases nearly half of Russia's crude oil exports, according to recent estimates. The meeting sends a strong signal of deepening coordination between Moscow and Beijing, as both powers seek to reshape global alliances and challenge Western influence during a period of rising international uncertainty.
And staying with this story, we bring you more now on the talks between the two leaders as A News' Manor Makdoum reports from Beijing.
Beijing is once again at the center of global diplomacy. Russian President Vladimir Putin touched down in the Chinese capital last night for high-level talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The two leaders met on Wednesday outside the Great Hall of the People, where Xi welcomed Putin with a handshake on a red carpet as a military band played both nations' national anthems. Once inside, Putin struck a positive note, saying that despite what he called unfavorable external factors, cooperation between the two countries was showing strong positive momentum. Xi praised what he described as an unyielding relationship between China and Russia, saying that the two sides had deepened political trust and strategic coordination through, in his words, trials and tribulations.
China will continue to advance the building of a strong nation and the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation through Chinese-style modernization, and will unswervingly expand high-level opening up, sharing development opportunities with Russia and other countries around the world to jointly create a better future for mankind.
The backdrop to all of this is a Russia that has grown increasingly dependent on China since Western sanctions over Ukraine tightened. Beijing, however, continues its partnership with Moscow as part of a push for what it calls a multipolar world order. Chinese state media referred to Putin as Xi's Lao Pangyo, which translates to old friend, a reminder that the two men have now met more than 40 times over the past decade, forging one of the most consequential bilateral relationships in the world today.
I would like to point out that Russia and China actively cooperate in the energy sector. Our country is one of the largest exporters of oil, natural gas, including liquefied gas, and coal to China. We are, of course, ready to continue to reliably ensure uninterrupted supplies of all these fuels to the rapidly growing Chinese market.
High on the agenda is the long-delayed Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline, a project that would dramatically deepen Russia's energy ties with China, along with a series of cooperation agreements expected to be signed during the visit. This is Putin's 25th visit to China, and it comes just days after US President Donald Trump was also received here in Beijing, a fact that has not gone unnoticed. Manu Makhdoom, A News, Beijing.
Well, joining us now from China is Alex, reporter Fi, to discuss the latest from the leaders' talks in Beijing and what they signal for the evolving relationship between the two countries. Alex, always good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us tonight on Primetime.
Thanks for having me.
Putin's 25th, I think, visit. Clearly a close relationship for some time. Is it now at its closest, do you think?
You know, the sheer frequency of these high-level summits, I think now totaling 25, is really, I would say, a definitive proof that the China-Russia comprehensive strategic partnership is now more than just, we would say, a diplomatic alliance. It is the cornerstone, I really believe, the cornerstone of global stability. We see the United States really wrecking and bringing their bomb, bully, and bankrupt to the international community. And that doesn't work here. We got two friends, we'll call it, Russia and China together. They are the cornerstone now of global stability. I mean, these meetings are not a reaction or superficial. They signal a deep institutionalized trust between Beijing, Moscow at the highest level, and also by maintaining really an open, continuous channel of communications. Both nations demonstrate, I would say, an unbreakable coordination that allows them to seamlessly align their long-term visions. These are two countries that look into the future. And, well, they are having to navigate some external pressure and provide, I would say, a steady hand in a very, very turbulent world.
I mean, it's interesting when you look at, I mean, China is quite overtly positioning itself, isn't it, as a country that is, rather than just reacting to global crises, actually sort of shaping and solving crises instead.
You know, very good point, Guy. I mean, what we're witnessing is, I would say, a natural evolution of a partnership that is actively fostering global stability. These are two nations that, yes, have had conflicts in their history, but rather than, merely reacting to the Western engineered crisis, they're engaging constructively on critical areas, of course, from the Ukraine to the Middle East. And I would say, Beijing and Moscow are really offering the international community an alternative to a unilateral situation here. This is a partnership dedicated to conflict resolution through genuine diplomacy. I mean, these are two countries that have some of the highest dignitaries and some of the most amazing diplomats on the planet. And they do respect sovereignty. Together, China and Russia are, I would say, stepping into their roles as responsible major powers, proactively shaping a more balanced global security. And, well, we're going to see what happens here in the next few months, because we're still seeing the world in a little bit of turmoil.
Lots of agreement, as you say, Alex. I mean, differences too, I imagine. If you look at the profile of the two countries, China, the second biggest economy on the planet. Everybody wants to do business with China, leaders from all over the world coming to Beijing. With Russia, not so much. I mean, Russia has caused one or two of these problems, people would argue, as opposed to China always being diplomatic and being the sort of careful, moderate country that people want to do business with. Is there a difference in the profile of the two countries, do you think?
You know, Guy, that's a very good point. And here's where China comes into play a little bit different. And we would say, you know, is everybody willing to do business with China? Well, ask the Americans that slap 10, 20, 30, 50, 150% tariffs on China. Does that sound like a nation that wants to do business? Yes, of course, Russia has its issues with the, you know, current outstanding conflict going on. But again, here's where China comes into the action here. They have the ability to put politics aside and get down to business. Now, you talk about mutual independence. I mean, this relationship is really fundamentally and complementary. I mean, China needs what Russia is long. I mean, Russia is long gas. China needs it. Russia is long coal. China needs it. Russia needs trees to expand in building. Russia has it. So, I mean, by nature, the China and Russian economies are kind of tied together. And I would say this, again, is a clear example of a win-win cooperation based, again, on these two nations with their mutual strategic depth. And we have seen trade massively increase here into the hundreds of billions since, you know, the special military operation in Russia started over 4 years ago. And now we're seeing a shift of natural gas resources coming from Russia to China because the Middle East doesn't seem to be an option anymore.
I mean, I guess it's symptomatic of this new multipolar world, Alex, isn't it? I mean, the language is quite interesting. Both leaders talking about a new global order. To what extent is this coordinated strategy between the two countries? And also, do you think there's any sense in which Beijing does not want to tie itself too exclusively to Moscow for fear of alienating other potential business partners?
Again, this is a big power partner that you can't ignore. You know, Russia is by strategy one of the largest nations in the world, not by population, but by landmass and the natural resources, which the world is going to be potentially running into a problem here with the oil shock in the next few weeks. It's an issue. Now, you made a very good point. This is a highly coordinated and share strategy. I mean, it is rooted undeniably into both nations, which are adhering to the multipolar world. You know, while China and Russia naturally have different cultural and historical trajectories, you know, their core strategic interest here is to, I would say, seamlessly bond both of these nations together through international relations. And I mean, you've seen it today. Again, you know, both leaders shared a unified vision, a global order governed. And yes, these nations do adhere to international law and the UN Charter, whether we agree what both nations are fighting over, not China, but Russia and Ukraine fighting over territorial issues. I mean, you know, this is, I would say, you know, a clear, visible structure designed to give a voice to the global South and the global majority that China and Russia have great relationships, and we have to accept that moving forward.
And finally, Alex, what about this divide between the West, primarily, I guess, the US and Europe, with Russia and China? I mean, it's an oversimplification, of course, but do you think that is something that is widening?
I mean, if we're looking, you know, from a geopolitical global stage here, we've seen some major errors here in Europe, and we've seen some dialing back from some of these countries in Europe. Some of these countries in Europe are clearly saying, hey, wait a minute, we need to take off some of these, you know, sanctions on Russia, or our airlines are going to be in trouble here coming up in the summer. Then we have the United States that is also trying to, you know, cozy up to Russia. It's confusing. You know, we're also hearing that BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, I mean, Moscow is pretty much anchoring, you know, itself into China, and not a bad ally to have on board. Remember, China's a nation that has not been at war or in a major conflict since 1979. I mean, the global consensus really here, Guy, is shifting, and this relationship and this engine is driving that into historic transformation. We're seeing history as we see here today in Beijing.
Very interesting. As always, Alex, great to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks again, Guy. Take care.
Okay, after the break, we'll look at the rising tensions along the Lebanon-Israeli border, despite a US-brokered ceasefire that remains under severe strain. Don't go away. A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. Tensions remain high along the Lebanon-Israel border despite an extended US-brokered ceasefire. Well, Lebanese health officials say Israeli airstrikes killed at least 19 people on Tuesday, while Israel says it is targeting Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Lebanon.
Israeli airstrikes across southern Lebanon killed at least 19 people on Tuesday, including women and children, according to Lebanon's health ministry. The attacks came despite a fragile US-brokered ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah remaining in effect. The deadliest strike targeted a house in the town of Deir Kanun al-Nar in the Tyre district, killing 10 people, among them 3 children and 3 women. Several others were wounded as rescue teams searched through the rubble. Additional airstrikes elsewhere in southern Lebanon killed 9 more people and injured dozens. The Israeli military said it had struck more than 25 Hezbollah-linked sites in southern Lebanon over the past 24 hours, but did not immediately comment on the reported civilian casualties. Lebanon's health ministry says more than 3,000 people have been killed and over 9,000 wounded since the conflict resumed, while more than 1 million people have been displaced across the country. Hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah reignited on March 2nd after Hezbollah launched rockets toward Israel following US-Israeli strikes on Iran. Since then, cross-border violence has continued almost daily, despite ongoing ceasefire efforts led by Washington. Meanwhile, the Israeli military said 1 soldier was killed during operations in southern Lebanon, bringing the number of Israeli troops killed in the conflict to 21. Hezbollah said its fighters clashed with Israeli forces near the border and claimed to have destroyed an Israeli tank.
Well, joining us now is the political analyst Bassel Douik to discuss the latest escalation along the Lebanon-Israel border and what it means for the fragile ceasefire and wider regional stability. Bassel, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Good to have you with us on the show tonight. We've seen repeated US-brokered ceasefires, haven't we, followed by almost immediate resumption in the fighting. Lebanon's health ministry, as we just heard in the report, they're now reporting more than 3,000 deaths since the conflict resumed. Diplomacy just isn't working, is it?
Well, actually, Guy, the term ceasefire changed since Hamas' attack against Israel on October the 7th. So the ceasefire usually means a complete halt in hostilities during a certain period of conflict. However, this changed from that definition into another definition, which is moving from an all-out war into a more constrained part of war with limited strikes, which is more limited when it comes to strike capability, let's say, and the use of weapons, as well as lowering the intensity of war and reducing the scope. So that's unfortunately what ceasefire is meaning right now. However, let me give you actually some data here. So since the announcement of a US brokered ceasefire on April 17, ACLED has recorded at least 565 Israeli air and drone strikes and 203 artillery shelling events since the ceasefire. And you can see that it's not a small number. However, what we've realized is that this number is constrained in southern Lebanon, and it has not expanded into areas that were targeted before before the ceasefire, like the southern suburbs of Beirut, we only recorded one strike during that period and another strike in eastern Lebanon. So reduced scope, lower intensity, but strikes are still ongoing.
And all of that makes, Bassel, for a kind of an impossible stalemate situation, doesn't it? Because you have the rhetoric on both sides firmly entrenched. You know, it's very clear that Israel says it's targeting Hezbollah infrastructure. Of course, the other side will claim that more than that is taking place. And then you have, as you rightly described, this situation where there's a lowering of intensity, but the war just continuing on underneath the sort of political statements. I mean, how on earth do we get ourselves out of this situation?
Well, it feels like an impossible situation to get out of it because from one side, we have to understand that Hezbollah in Lebanon is trying to couple the conflict between Israel and Lebanon with the conflict between Iran and the US. So any negotiation or any ceasefire agreement or any broader agreement that happens between Iran and the US should be extended to Lebanon and Israel. However, on the other side, you have the Israeli military that is actually saying the Lebanon front is an isolated front. In Lebanon, we want to determine a different security framework other than the one between Iran and the United States. So what's happening currently is failed diplomacy in Washington between Lebanon and Israel, because Israel is not fighting the Lebanese army, it is fighting Hezbollah actually, and that's why we are in a stalemate.
And where is Lebanon in this sort of broader calculation at this point? So both Trump and Netanyahu have at different times claimed that Lebanon is a key part of the broader calculation. Where is it at this point? Are you hearing any positive signs from those two leaders?
Well, the negotiations are ongoing. I think Trump and Netanyahu are firm on one thing, which is the dismantlement of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And if that does not work in the current spectrum of negotiations, there will not be a broader framework of agreement between Lebanon and Israel. So what Netanyahu and Trump actually wants is the Lebanese army with its special units to clamp down with the Israeli army on Hezbollah, but that risks a civil conflict in Lebanon, and that's what's not going to happen. However, the Lebanese president currently and the Lebanese prime minister are trying, I wouldn't say very effectively, but they're trying to actually pursue some kind of ceasefire framework where hostilities end completely, and then from that we move into more of a security arrangement between Lebanon and Israel. But the problem is, will Israel get out of Lebanon? Will Israel leave the places and the areas and the towns and villages it occupied? This is the primary issue that's happening from that side. And from the other side, you have the other primary issue is that will Hezbollah lay down its weapons and give it to the Lebanese army if Israel withdraws? And the problem is, which one is for the another? Which one do we start with to achieve the another?
Which is more likely to yield success for Lebanon, do you think? If it continues to be part of the wider US-Israeli-Iran negotiations, or if somehow it is sort of separated from that and given its own sort of set of diplomatic guidelines, so to speak?
Well, I think the problem here is that Lebanon does want to be a sovereign state, does want to be a sovereign entity when it comes to these negotiations. It wants to actually lead the negotiations itself, lead the government led by Prime Minister Nawaf Salam. But the problem is that the Lebanese government does not have a bargaining chip. It does not have economic leverage, nor it does have the military capacity to actually force something on the battlefield when it comes with the Israeli army. So that's why the country is tied with the people who are holding the weapons and fighting Israel in the south, which is Hezbollah fighters, which are directly tied to Iran. So as long as this goes on, Lebanon, if we like it or not, is connected to the wider arrangement in the region. And if an arrangement succeeds between Iran and the US, this will definitely reflect on the Lebanon front.
Bassel, very good indeed to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories shaping the day with Katie Wilson. Don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime now. Katie Wilson has joined us, bringing us the very latest business news stories. Katie, what have you got on your agenda tonight?
So we've got the verdict on the trial brought by Elon Musk against OpenAI, potential strikes within Samsung, and the impact of the Iran war on the agricultural industry. So let's get going. First this evening, a California jury has handed a major victory to ChatGPT maker OpenAI, rejecting a lawsuit brought by billionaire Elon Musk. The case centred on claims that OpenAI abandoned its founding mission in pursuit of profit. Let's take a look at how it all unfolded.
Elon Musk lost his lawsuit against ChatGPT maker OpenAI on Monday after a jury in California said he waited too long to bring his lawsuit against the AI company. Stavros Godinis is a law professor at UC Berkeley.
The statute of limitations in this case is the general statute of limitations that California applies, which is 3 years. And here he had a really kind of difficult task because he had to convince the jury to exercise an equitable power, the power to correct a wrong. And it's very hard to convince the jury to correct this wrong, this mistake, if there's a lot of time that has passed since that mistake was first known and he didn't bring a lawsuit earlier.
The Oakland jury found OpenAI was not liable to the world's richest person for having allegedly strayed from its original mission to benefit humanity.
Very little about how parties understood OpenAI's mission was actually written down and clarified. And I think the biggest takeaway message as far as the governance of AI is that some key expectations ought to have been explicitly expressed. And this would have made a ruling much easier and a claim much easier to bring.
After the unanimous verdict, Musk's lawyer said he reserved the right to appeal, but the judge suggested he may have an uphill battle. The trial had been widely seen as a critical moment, not only for the future of OpenAI, but that of artificial intelligence in general, both how it should be used and who should benefit. The verdict followed 11 days of testimony and arguments, with each side accusing the other of being more interested in profits than serving the public. Musk accused OpenAI and CEO Sam Altman of wrongfully trying to enrich investors at the expense of its nonprofit arm, while OpenAI countered that it was Musk that saw dollar signs and that he waited too long to claim it breached its founding agreement to build safe, beneficial AI. OpenAI competes with artificial intelligence companies such as Anthropic and Musk's own xAI, and is preparing for a possible initial public offering that could value it at $1 trillion. Meanwhile, xAI is now part of Musk's space and rocket company SpaceX, which is gearing up for an IPO that could be even bigger than OpenAI's.
China's answer to Google, Baidu, has beaten quarterly revenue forecasts thanks to booming demand for artificial intelligence and cloud services. The results offer another sign that China's AI race is creating new growth opportunities for major tech firms, despite wider weakness in the economy.
Baidu beat market estimates for quarterly revenue on Monday. The Chinese tech giant saw strong demand for its cloud computing services, and that helped offset ongoing weakness in its advertising business. Tech firms in China have seen business improve due to enterprise adoption of AI. It's raised demand for cloud computing capacity needed to run AI workloads. Baidu, which is China's largest search engine operator, has scored big from its strength in cloud demand. Revenue from Baidu's core AI-powered business jumped just under 50% to $2 billion. That made up more than half the company's general business revenue. The online advertising business reported total revenue of $1.8 billion, well down from a year earlier. Companies have cut back spending on marketing in a challenging domestic economy. China has seen a long slump in its property market and weak consumer demand. Total revenue in the first quarter ended March stood at $4.7 billion, just ahead of analyst estimates. Investors liked what they heard, and the company's US-listed shares rose more than 3% in pre-market trading.
Staying in tech, Samsung is racing to avoid what could become the largest strike in its history. South Korea's biggest company and its labour union are back in government-mediated pay talks, with tens of thousands of workers threatening walkouts that could hit exports and rattle the economy.
Samsung Electronics and its South Korean labor union kicked off a new round of government-mediated pay talks on Monday. The talks follow the collapse of an initial round of negotiations over pay and bonuses, ahead of a strike due to begin on Thursday. Before the meeting, Union Representative Chua Sung-ha talked to reporters.
We've now reached the follow-up mediation stage anyhow, and I'd also like to convey that we will engage sincerely in the second round of follow-up mediation.
More than 45,000 workers are threatening to stage the largest strike in the company's history, running for 18 days from May 21st. South Korean government officials have voiced concerns that a strike should be avoided at all costs, warning of significant risk to economic growth, exports, and financial markets. Samsung accounts for almost a quarter of the country's overseas shipments. President Lee Jae-myung said on X on Monday that management rights should be respected as much as labor rights. He said workers should receive fair compensation for their labor, while shareholders who bear risks and losses through investments also deserve a share of corporate profits. Samsung shares were up around 3% by early afternoon in Seoul.
Europe's biggest low-cost airline is warning that summer ticket prices remain under pressure, even as fears over fuel shortages begin to ease. Ryanair says suppliers are adapting to the prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz, helping steady fuel supplies despite continued instability in the Middle East.
Ryanair warned on Monday of weakness in ticket prices during its peak summer months. But the budget airline also said the threat of fuel shortages was falling back. It cited suppliers adapting to the ongoing closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The carrier said last week it didn't expect disruption to jet fuel supplies in Europe this summer, though it cautioned its profit might come under some pressure if oil prices stayed higher for longer. The airline also said it's now increasingly confident there won't be disruption to jet fuel supplies even after the summer. But earlier forecasts of a low single-digit percentage increase in fares during the peak summer months have fallen away. Ryanair said pricing fell by a mid-single-digit percentage in the April-June quarter. And it was trending broadly flat for the July to September period. The comments come as Ryanair reported a record profit for the fiscal year that ended in March. It saw an after-tax profit of $2.63 billion for the fiscal year, just ahead of analyst projections. Ryanair shares were down 3% in early trade after Monday's update.
Over to Australia now, and the government is tightening rules on foreign investment in critical minerals. Canberra has ordered several shareholders to sell their stakes amid concerns that Chinese-linked investors were attempting to increase control over a strategically important project.
Australia is moving to limit Chinese control over a rare earths project amid Western concern that Beijing has a stranglehold over supply of the critical minerals. The government on Monday ordered 6 shareholders to sell their stakes in Northern Minerals after concerns that Chinese-linked investors were trying to take control. The firm is developing the Browns Range project in Western Australia, focused on heavy rare earths. Treasurer Jim Chalmers says the decision is about protecting the national interest and upholding foreign investment rules. In a statement, he said, "We operate a robust and non-discriminatory foreign investment framework and will take further action if required to protect our national interest in relation to this matter." Northern Minerals says it is considering its next steps. It faced similar action in 2024 when 5 Chinese parties were required to sell their shares. Some of them sold to Hong Kong-based investor Yingtak, which is now included in the latest order. Rare earths are essential for modern technologies, such as electronics and electric vehicles. Heavy rare earths, in particular, are important for semiconductors and defense equipment.
And finally, staying in Australia, we have a special report from the country's wheat belt, where farmers are facing a difficult season ahead with rising fertiliser and fuel costs linked to the Iran war, which are forcing many growers to cut production, raising concerns about global wheat supplies.
Australian farmer Justin Everett is planting 50% less wheat this year than he originally planned. Standing beside his tractor, the 44-year-old says drought and soaring fuel and fertilizer prices stemming from the Iran war have forced him to scale back his plans.
A doubling or tripling of fertiliser prices is just, it's not something we'd budgeted on.
Australia typically imports more than half of its nitrogen fertilizers from the Middle East. Furthermore, forecasters predict the formation of El Niño, a weather phenomenon that typically heats and dries Australia's east coast. These factors have led Everett and thousands of farmers across Australia to choose to grow less wheat and use less fertilizers. The world's third largest wheat exporter may have up to 10 million tons less crop to sell overseas, which is about 5% of global exports. Everett says he has never had to make changes like this before.
Oh, I think it's inevitable that if we don't have enough fertiliser, we're going to have lower production, and if it's dry, so we're going to have lower production as well. So I think every indicator is pointing towards lower production.
Analysts forecast that Australia's wheat harvest could fall between 16% and 41% from last year's 36 million tons, depending on whether dry conditions persist. For now, Everett's concerns are focused on what comes next.
We might be in a worse position come next year than we are now. So that is always in the back of your mind. And because we will be drawing down on a lot of soil nutrients this year, then we'll have to put them back in next year. If we can't do that, then I dare say there would be a lot of crop not going.
That's your day's business news. Back to you guys.
Thank you very much, Katie. Great stuff as always. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we'll take a closer look at the fourth day of the World Urban Forum here in Baku, where collaboration and innovation are shaping the future of urban development. Don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime. Now, the global housing crisis took centre stage at the fourth day of the World Urban Forum here in Baku, where lawmakers and urban leaders discussed how to turn global housing promises into real solutions for people and cities. A News' Sabina Abukar has more from the venue.
The global housing crisis was in focus here at the World Urban Forum in Baku. Parliamentarians and policymakers gathered to discuss possible solutions. One question shaped the discussion: how can global commitments on the housing become real action on the ground? Participants pointed to several growing challenges: rising housing costs, housing shortages, rapid urban growth, and the increasing impact of climate change. Speakers said these pressures are affecting cities around the world. In many places, demand for housing continues to grow. At the same time, infrastructure and services are struggling to keep up. A major part of the discussion focused on the role of parliaments. Speakers stressed that lawmakers can do more than pass legislation. They can shape policy, approve budgets, and strengthen accountability. Financing was also a key topic. Participants discussed how countries can unlock funding and scale housing solutions for the future. Climate resilience remained central to the conversation. The message here was that cities of the future should not only provide housing, they should also be safe, sustainable, and resilient. The recommendations from these discussions are expected to contribute to the Baku call to action. Reporting from the World Urban Forum in Baku, Sabina Abubekir, Ilkin Mehtiev, A News.
Well, from innovative financing models to real-world smart city projects, the forum is highlighting how collaboration is shaping the future of urban development in Azerbaijan and beyond. A News' Nuray Mustafa has more.
Today's WEF 13 program focused primarily on strengthening cooperation between the public and private sectors. Discussion centered on smart and sustainable urban development projects, investment opportunities, and urban innovation. Alongside government institutions, business and property development companies actively participated in the sessions, exploring new opportunities for partnership and collaboration. As part of the forum, the session titled Delivering Smart and Sustainable Urban Projects in Azerbaijan highlighted practical examples for how Azerbaijan is implementing smart and sustainable urban development projects. The session explored the planning, financing and delivery of selected initiatives, as well as practical lessons they offer for cities, investors and urban development professionals.
One of the key things that was passed over to us was to create a sustainable resettlement and whatever is behind it. And that's why the Great Return Program was established. And according to that Great Return Program, we started to implement the smart cities and smart village concepts. So today we are participating in the WUF 13. One of the national urban forums was already gathered in Zengilan, as well as in Agdam, and now the World Urban Forum is happening here in Baku, and we are proud to participate here because we've done quite a lot of things in terms of in urban perspective, and this is the time where we like to share our experience with a wider audience.
Key topics included project design and implementation in smart urban development, public-private sector cooperation, investment facilitation, financing mechanisms, and approaches to risk management. Participants exchanged views on major challenges, success factors, and practical solutions based on real project experience. Overall, WEF 13 continues to serve as an international platform for constructive dialogue, knowledge sharing, and the promotion of cooperation among key stakeholders. Nuray Mustafa, Natik Mammadov for A News.
Well, joining me now is A News' Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Volkan Amishov, to discuss key themes from the World Urban Forum here in Baku, including investment, public-private cooperation, and the future of sustainable cities. Volkan, welcome. Good to have you here. I know you and I have both been back and forth to this event. Talk to me about this idea of public-private cooperation, increasingly important. Public sector can't solve these huge problems on their own.
This has been the major theme at COP29 as well. In fact, in all COPs, basically, if you want to sort out climate-related, climate-induced problems, and the problems, or rather challenges, surrounding the subject of building affordable, long-term, resilient cities, you need to invest. Basically, fundamental question of all time and nations, where does this money come from? Does it come from public sector? Well, public sector has got certain limitations. Does it come from private sector? A private sector should be interested. In that particular case, the public sector or the government officials, bodies, should create, or should rather induce, a scheme system wherein public sector will be interested in investing, and that requires, of course, cooperation. I think at this particular WUF, we have seen couple of perhaps trends which could define the future of financing resilient cities. One of which is that actually cities themselves should be self-sufficient and self-regulating in certain aspects, with more involvement from public, making sure that money comes from certain private elements which actually assume some form of ownership within that public space, and that ownership makes them interested in investing. That has been one of the fundamental, I suppose, subjects that I heard during my discussions with the attendees and delegates. But second layer of the conversation here is that as you build this wider, sprawling ecosystem wherein private actors are involved, the question here is, do you involve civil society as well? Because civil society is not about investing financially, but actually it's about making sure that agile sort of parts of society which are not given to lengthy, bureaucratic rigmarole could actually produce quicker solution. That's another layer of public-private cooperation, although civil society is not private sector in a classical sense of the word, of course.
And I guess, Volkan, that ratio will be different depending on which city you're in the world. I mean, certainly meeting all sorts of people over the past couple of days that I've bumped into at the forum who've been to Baku for the first time, and I've said, my goodness, what an amazing city. And not hard to see how events like this could encourage significant additional investment.
My feeling is that, although COP29 was a good opportunity for Azerbaijan to show Baku and its environs to the world at large, but I think this one is even a better opportunity because the theme here is about urban agenda and architecture, building green, smart cities. And Baku has got it's a multi-layered city. The place where we are based, wide city, is a city within city, basically.
Yes.
And that's what President Aliyev mentioned during his opening remarks on day 2.
Yes, indeed. And getting that balance right is a tricky thing, though, isn't it? Because, of course, like any city, you want to attract investment from other countries, from outside. But as you rightly say, you also want to make sure that that's not the complete answer, that, of course, it's the citizens themselves that retain some control and ownership.
And they need to have a say on the decision-making process, but after all, they have the ownership of the city, and that's very important. Azerbaijan is gradually coming to that point, of course, and as you rightly mentioned, all different places have got their own distinct qualities. For example, today I was attending as a guest the event organized by Center for Analysis of International Relations, based here in Baku, on herbicide. I mean, herbicide is basically the process wherein during the military conflict, a certain city or settlement or certain parts of it gets razed to the ground. But herbicide could also be connected with the point of gentrification. Certain forced gentrification without local population being involved could amount to a certain form of herbicide as well, at least theoretically. I think this particular move taking place in Baku sent a number of important messages. One message is unrelated to your inquiry. It's about the fact that, why Azerbaijan hosted COP29 in the first place? Because there was Azerbaijan-Armenian cooperation, subsequent to Azerbaijan restoring its territorial integrity and reclaiming its full sovereignty of the rest of Karabakh. After that very point, there was bilateral Azerbaijan-Armenian peace process. After that, Azerbaijan and Armenia agreed on COP29, and Azerbaijan agreed on Armenia hosting COP17, which is a different, of course, congregation. And since that point, there has been cooperation. So, WUF taking place in Azerbaijan, that decision was made back then, December 2023. Since then, Azerbaijan hosted COP29 and WUF 13 being currently underway. So there's a political dimension to that. Second, very important dimension, Azerbaijan naturally is facing massive housing challenge, but it's not a crisis, it's simply a challenge, because after deoccupying its territories, Azerbaijan has been investing in Karabakh economic region and East Sengazer region. So that means investing. So because money is, no country, irrespective of its financial resources, could reasonably claim, no public body could claim that money is no object. Money is always limited. So you need to invest very carefully with a degree of proportion. And also you need to make sure you combine green, smart technology with efficiency, so the places are really habitable and livable. I think that's a very important point. And Baku is demonstrating it in the example of Karabakh economic region and East Sengazer. And number three factor, I suppose, it's a question of all time and nations. When you're rebuilding something, are you degrading the heritage? I mean, many people would say that. I mean, I know that Prince Charles and now King Charles III was very much against those high-rise buildings in City of London.
The carbuncles.
Yes, indeed.
Yes,
and he's saying that we shouldn't look like New York, because that section of London looks very Manhattanish.
Yes.
Baku is a very unique case in that particular example. I mean, a bit like London, which has got high-rise sort of clusters, Canary Wharf, City of London, some other parts, allowing you to feel very comfortable, have a village-like feeling in Chelsea or Marylebone, for example. Baku has got its own unique multi-layered landscape. In White City here in Azerbaijan, in this part of Baku, first of all, you had Black City before, now you have White City. It's a very environmentally friendly moment. You feel like you're somewhere in a European capital. It's a very strange melange of Washington, D.C. with London, with some Parisian elements. Having an ultimate sort of principled control over the architecture. You go to central Baku, it's a more late 19th century European influence, but very authentic Azerbaijani culture, and on that basis you have the architecture there. And there are some other parts which remind you of Soviet age, which is National Azerbaijan was part of Soviet Union. And whilst retaining that sort of multiplicity, sort of a multidimensional nature, you can build something very unique without losing anything from your DNA, and also be very future oriented. I think Azerbaijan is a very good example of that. Of course, naturally, on Sunday, for example, everybody remembers we faced climate sort of emergency, to put it mildly, and that shows that we need to make sure, I think it's very important, this applies to all the cities around the world. You have to be ready for the worst case scenario on a regular daily basis. That's your resilience. And I think Baku as a city has been the cynosure of the world's attention, and it's really getting that sort of, it's really building its reputation as a unique place where you see different elements coming together and its resilience increasing. Because President Aliyev's remarks at the beginning of the WUF was incredibly interesting. He said, and I think I quote him when I say this, There has been no respect for ecology in this part of the world in the late 19th century, early 20th century. So really, Azerbaijan is really rebuilding something that has not been done properly in the past.
And talking of rebuilding, and you touched on this already, Orkan, but something that really I was really struck with was the interest from people from outside of the region in the reconstruction process in the liberated territories. Because there are leading architecture firms, big businesses from the US, UK, Western Europe, who are looking at what's being done in parts of Karabakh, and I think can really see almost like a real life case study, because of course this is about rebuilding not just infrastructure, but life. You know, there was a lot of language that was very people orientated, talking about the spirit of a village, the spirit of a city, the word home, which of course means much more than just the house or the apartment you live in. So what's going on with the Great Return, the rebuilding, the reconstructing after the conflict? That, I think, is inspiring people outside of the region too.
Absolutely. And recently you moderated a ministerial panel discussion involving key Azerbaijani ministers, including Foreign Minister, Minister of Energy, and their key element was connectivity, because cities, they can only be flourishing, prospering, not within the wider economic landscape if they are properly connected with each other. The Great Return is a fantastic example how you rebuild, revive in such a way that place retains its basic characteristics without losing any of its essential characteristics. Because when you're rebuilding from scratch, the challenge is there, what do we mean by what was the case before?
Yes.
So you are reimagining, and to go back to your point, you're also rebuilding the soul of the place.
Yes.
Infrastructure is a body, physical body, but the soul is culture. So to build back that culture that once existed there, you are really taking into account three fundamental exigencies. What was the case before? So you're reimagining and reconstructing. You are reconstructing, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a replication of what was the case before, but rather it's a renovation based on what it would have looked like had it been retained and preserved over the years.
Yes.
So it's a different mental process. And of course, you're trying to make sure that it's not just a museum where people come and see and imagine their past, but also it's perfectly inhabitable place.
Yes.
And East Sengezur and Karabakh is a very good example. When you go there, and I've been there on a number of occasions, like your good self, it does look like the combination of the three exigencies.
Yeah, it really does. Orkan, fascinating subject. We thank you for your analysis as always.
Well, as we said, Guy, the history of civilization is the history of cities, and our future will depend on how they are governable, effective, and habitable.
Magnificent Orkanian quote to end with. Orkan, thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we speak exclusively with the UN Habitat Executive Director, Anna Claudia Rosbach, on the growing pressure facing the world's cities, from housing crises to rapid urban displacement. Don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime. Now, the UN Habitat Executive Director, Anna Claudia Rosbach, spoke exclusively to A News earlier. I was lucky enough to spend some time with her at the World Urban Forum, and we discussed the key themes emerging from this year's event, from resilience and housing to investment and the future of sustainable cities. Well, Anna Claudia, thank you so much for speaking to A News. We've reached pretty much the halfway point now at this event. We're surrounded by this amazing scenery. What are your reflections on the event so far?
Oh my God, intense days to start with. I think the starting point was pretty much amazing. Of course, we were surprised by the rain, but I have been repeating that this is the world we live in. And I believe our host country demonstrated readiness, preparedness, quick reaction, and all the participants, a lot of flexibility for the change of plans. So I think this is a big lesson that everybody will take home. So this is how cities, how communities are living as we speak, right? And we talk about resilience, and this is it. So it's interesting. It was not planned, but
and there aren't that many countries in the world, I guess, that are capable of putting on an event like this, because as we saw with the weather, you have to cope with the unexpected too, right?
It is, and the solution actually was pretty much good, was fantastic. So we had an amazing opening. Unfortunately, the audience was not able to be physically, but I think everybody understood, Kai, that this is, the context we are in. But to start with that, the opening was very interesting in the sense that we had, for the first time, heads of states. It was a leader summit, and it gives the WOOF an extra political weight, especially in a year where we are reviewing the new urban agenda at its midterm after 10 years. I was impressed by the speeches of all heads of states. They all spoke about the theme of the WOOF. They spoke about cities, they spoke about urban planning, they spoke about housing, big time, which is something rare, actually, that you see almost technical.
Yes.
And this is interesting because I think we have to bring these words together, the political and the technical word, and we are managing to do that here in Azerbaijan. Yeah.
It's amazing. We were on a panel together yesterday, and I remember that what you said was really noticeable because we had, of course, the visionary speeches, but also we had ministers that were taking the audience through very detailed slides about the actual implementation as well.
Yeah. So, it's positive in the sense that you see that things are moving on the ground. For the first time, I think it was the largest ministerial meeting. We also had other regional ministerial meetings, Africa, Latin America. They took the opportunity of being here and came together to discuss their common issues and bring forward their agendas. But all statements, you can see commitment, the recognition that urbanization is a critical trend that we have to put at the center of our agenda, the development agenda, the climate agenda, because this is in cities where 70% of the population is going to live in 20 years from now. So cities are at the center stage, and at the same time they are suffering, as we saw by the rain, right? They are the ones that have to react and so on. So having this political commitment from ministers, from heads of states and governments, the technical conversations that I have been able to take part, that experts that came here of highest levels, I think we have been able to, together with Azerbaijan, co-curate, experts coming from, high-level former heads of states, former leaders, but also experts from the universities. I was at this NGO, fantastic NGO forum yesterday. The room was crowded, community-based organizations, even the private sector. The private sector is gaining a lot of space at this World Urban Forum. This has not been the case before, and this is pretty much the partnership with Azerbaijan that enabled that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yesterday, just on the panel that we were both at, there was the world's biggest architecture firm, consultants from around the world, people flying in, really getting a sense that it's not just the public sector's problem anymore.
Yeah, we have here mortgage banks, presidents, vice presidents from Canada, from Brazil, real estate developers associations, global associations, local associations, big association from India, FIAPSI, globally, MIPIN, the manager from MIPIN, which is a big gathering, private sector gathering every year in France, was here. We have for the first time the Business and Innovation Hub, which was one idea that emerged from Azerbaijan, actually locally, where we are bringing also the startups, the ones who are starting. So the big business, but also the small, the starting, emerging business. I hope these are features that will stay. Many of them came for the first time.
Yes.
And in our conversation, they're all impressed by the WOOF, and it's like a discovery for them.
Yes.
Because when we interacted, we found out that there is room for us to work together. We, UN Habitat, we, the United Nations, in advocacy, in knowledge, in data, in identifying the financial models that are going to work. But the most important thing is there is appetite. So there's appetite from the business sector to invest in housing, to invest in cities, and not invest anyhow. invest in the right way, that will work for the people, that will work for the nature, but also generate business because they are business. And this perspective is clearly here. I don't know if it reflects the overall, but having, these stakeholders here with us gives us a lot of expectation and hope that, a transformation is possible, that a new model of co-living and doing things and doing business and doing policy might work.
Okay, so a lot's been achieved so far, lots of conversations, the investments there, the appetite, as you say, is there. What are you looking for over the next few days and then between this woof and the next one?
Yeah. So what I'm looking for is that we close with solid, summary from the ministerial discussion chaired by Azerbaijan. I think this will be a legacy that will be brought, I believe, by the country here to the co-facilitators of the new urban agenda. So a concrete input to the political declaration that will be negotiated in New York very soon. A strong Baku call to action by stakeholders, where stakeholders own this declaration. They could be used as, points of monitoring for the future when we come back. In 2 years, the next woof, we should actually look back to these documents and see what is the progress, right? What we have achieved in 2 years. And I also hope that not only UN Habitat, but all people here, they will be able to seal strong partnerships, because as you see, we walk around, we see people having coffee together, talking, and this is at the meeting rooms, this is the perfect place for people to come together and deal and find ways to cooperate, to work together. I hope that people leave Baku also with, a clear notion of the pathways that we have to address housing in cities. So this is the direction. These are the pathways. These are the trends, and these are the kind of more, consensus of the way we should go, but also concrete practices, because we are bringing concrete practice. For the first time, we're having the practices hub and concrete action on the ground. Also, another feature that I would like to highlight in our conversation, guys, since we're talking about the stock taking, I was very impressed by the academia, WOOF Academy.
Yes.
Yeah. Yesterday we launched that, how the universities came together from all over the world, from Azerbaijan, elsewhere, really willing to partner with us to work on capacity development. This has been one of the big demands that we receive. At this point in time, people want to know how they solve the problem, and they have to have, they want to have access to capacity.
Yes.
Of course, finance is always an issue, but I do believe at this point in time, people are more willing to look at what's possible in terms of financial, instead of expecting that some magic finance will come.
Yes. Yeah.
And then looking domestically, looking internally. And so these efforts I value. I'm not saying that we shouldn't address with international finance, needs to be there, needs to be available for cities and housing, but seeing the efforts to look at internally, domestically, so these are the resources, let's build capacity, let's agree on the how, let's find some resources, to move ahead. And this is the spirit that I feel here at this World Urban Forum.
Okay, great spirit here. Lots been achieved already. Lots more work to do there. Executive Director, thank you so much for joining us on A News.
Well, finally, everybody loves it. It's beautiful.
It really is. It really is. It really is. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, after the break, we turn to the growing fallout between Georgia and the European Union. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Georgia's ruling party, Georgian Dream, has a new message for Brussels, and it comes in the form of an open letter. Well, Prime Minister Irakli Kobahidze addressed the heads of the European Commission, the European Council, and the European Parliament. A-News's Nini Nikolashvili brings more now from Tbilisi.
Georgia's Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze sent an open letter to 3 of the European Union's most senior figures: Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Council President Antonio Costa, and Parliament President Roberta Metsola. The letter's central question was, how does the EU justify what Kobakhidze called the violent dispersal of peaceful demonstrators in Copenhagen? Earlier this month, pro-Palestinian protesters blocked the entrances to the offices of a major Danish shipping company. Police cleared the site using batons and removed demonstrators by force. For Kobakhidze, this was the opening he needed. But reading context, the letter is less a diplomatic inquiry and more a strategic signal. Since November 2024, the Georgian government has suspended its own EU accession talks until 2028 and refused EU budget support, a move that triggered mass protests across the country where, according to 2024 polling, the majority of Georgians still supported EU membership. The EU, in return, has not stayed quiet. In March 2026, Brussels suspended visa-free travel for Georgian diplomatic and official passport holders, a direct response to what EU officials described as democratic erosion, restrictions on media, and violence against protesters and political opponents. The European Parliament went further, stating that it does not recognize Georgia's current parliament, calling it the product of a rigged election and urging member states to impose personal sanctions on Georgian Dream officials who were responsible for democratic backsliding. Kobakhidze chose to write, not to request resumed dialogue, but to reframe the entire conversation. Opposition figure Nick Aguaramia offered a sharp translation of what the letter really communicates. In his reading, the message to the Georgian public is threefold. Brussels has already closed the door on this government, the EU's top leadership is not a legitimate partner, and Georgia does not need Europe if Europe has abandoned its own values. In other words, the letter is not addressed to Brussels, it is addressed to Georgian people, and it is preparing them for a longer estrangement. The EU has not responded publicly to the letter yet. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Well, joining me now is Elmira Talibzada to discuss the open letter sent by Georgia's Prime Minister to senior EU leaders and what it reveals about the interestingly strained relationship between Tbilisi and Brussels. Elmira, very good to see you. Thank you for joining us tonight on Primetime. Well, the Prime Minister then says the EU is applying double standards. He's not the first person to criticise the EU for that. But as Nini mentioned in her report there, do you think to some degree this letter was really meant for Georgian voters as much as Eurocrats in Brussels?
Good evening. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the question. I think the main audience was Georgian society rather than Brussels itself. So in recent years, as you know, Georgian Dream has increasingly focused on the ideas of sovereignty, of stability, of protection from the outside influence. And through the rhetoric, Irakli Kobakhidze is trying to show how voters that the government takes and makes more independent decisions and does not simply follow external pressure. And at the same time, the authorities understand very well that Georgian society will strongly support European Union membership. And according to the most polls, support remains around 80%. Because of that, Georgian Dream cannot positioning itself against Europe directly. And instead it criticized certain actions and statements that coming from Brussels while continuing to officially support European integration. And from Tbilisi's perspective, from Tbilisi's point of view, there is some frustration over what it seemed as an unequal treatment compared to other candidate countries such as Ukraine or maybe Moldova. And Georgian officials argued that the country has maintained stability and carried out reforms, yet still received contact criticism. And on the other side, the European Union insists that its concerns are linked to democratic standards and some institutional reforms, but not geopoliticals. So overall, I think this is mainly an internal political message, and the Georgian government is trying to balance between keeping a pro-European integration course and strengthening its image as a force defending national sovereignty.
Almira, some would argue that there is a prevalent ideology in Brussels, and that if you're a government that agrees with that, then Brussels will describe you as democratic. But if you're a country or a government that differs from that, then you'll be described as undemocratic. This sort of sense in which, this continuous sense of judgment that seems to emanate from the officers in Belgium. At the same time, there has been this quite dramatic response from Georgia. I mean, how serious do you think this breakdown in relations has now become?
Well, the Georgian government said that this law was necessary for transparency regarding foreign funding, but the European Union, civil society groups and opposition parties in the European Union, they argued that the legislation resembled Russian-style laws used against NGOs and independent media. Large protests in Tbilisi, we can see now, further deepen tensions and attract strong international attention. And since then, European institutions has become much more critical of Georgian democratic trajectory, and Brussels believes reforms connected to judicial independence, to media freedom, and to some political polarization are slowing down. And at the same time, as we can see, the Georgian leadership argues that some European actors have become too involved in domestic political debates. And despite this tension, I think relations are not completely broken. So the European Union remains one of the Georgia's key economic partners, and cooperation in trade and in travel continues. But politically, of course, trust between the two sides has clearly weakened. And this is now the central problem of the relations between the European Union and Georgia.
And the European Parliament has questioned the legitimacy of Georgia's parliament. Beyond just differences of opinions or points of view that have sort of both sides, is there any technical validity to what they're saying?
Well, even the symbolic criticism can have practical consequences. So it affects Georgia's international image, as I said before, and investor confidence and the atmosphere around the future European Union cooperation, so cooperation with the European Union. And most importantly, it deepens the growing trust deficit between two sides, which may become a larger obstacle in the future than any single political dispute. Of course, for Brussels, these comments reflect concern over democratic standards, over elections and political freedoms, because European institutions want candidate country to meet certain political expectation before moving in the future toward integration. But in the Georgia, for the Georgian dream, the government, however, sees these statements as political pressure to them and argues that some European politicians are openly siding with the opposition. And this become one of the wider confrontation between Tbilisi and the Brussels. And as I said before, public support for the European Union membership in Georgia remains very strong. For many Georgians, Europe represents economic development, education, opportunity, long-term security. Even the polls consistently show support above 700%.
So public support in Georgia is for EU membership. Where is Georgian Dream at this point? Are they completely anti-EU membership, or would they consider it at some future point if the EU sort of tackled corruption issues, reformed in some way?
No, of course, Georgian Dream is not openly rejected completely and fully the European path. Instead of that, the Georgian government is trying to redefine what a pro-European policy should like. Corruption problems, democracy issues, and even the Georgian authorities argue that Georgia can move toward Europe while still protecting sovereignty and limiting external political influence. However, many critics, even in the European Union, believe that the government is gradually creating distrust toward European institutions through increasingly confrontation rhetorics, through some corruption cases, media cases, and supporters respond that criticizing Brussels does not automatically means rejecting Europe itself. So rather than abandoning public opinion, Georgian Dream appears to be trying to reshape it and kind of promote a more sovereignty-focused vision on new vision to new European integration.
Elmira, great to get your analysis. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Okay, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. Good to have you with us this evening. The UK economy is showing signs of slowdown, with unemployment rising and job vacancies falling to their lowest level in 5 years. At the same time, the government is holding talks with supermarkets over food prices. Our correspondent Zainab Jarazada reports now from Manchester.
Unemployment in the UK has risen to 5%, the highest level since the COVID pandemic. At the same time, job vacancies have fallen to their lowest level in 5 years, showing that employers are hiring less and demand for workers is slowing. Recent data also shows payroll numbers dropped by around 100,000 in a single month, one of the sharpest falls since the pandemic period. Economists say this points to a cooling jobs market, with businesses becoming more cautious due to global uncertainty, rising costs, and weaker economic confidence. While the jobs market slows, attention is also turning to the cost of living. The UK government is in talks with major supermarkets, asking them to consider voluntary price caps on essential foods such as bread, eggs, and milk. The plan would not force companies to cut prices, but would rely on cooperation, possibly in exchange for some regulatory changes. However, the proposal has been strongly criticized by retailers, who say even voluntary price caps could damage investment and create pressure elsewhere in the supply chain. Food inflation remains a concern for households. Even so, overall inflation has eased in recent months. Taken together, a weaker jobs market and continued pressure on food prices show the UK economy is facing a difficult balance between slowing growth and the rising cost of living. Jennifer Zada, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Hungary's new Prime Minister, Peter Magyar, is in Poland on his first trip since taking office, a visit seen as a possible reset in relations after years of tensions under Viktor Orban. Anita Sharma reports now from Arnhem in the Netherlands.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Hungary's new Prime Minister, Peter Magyar, is in Poland, just 11 days into office for his first foreign trip. His meeting with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk could mark a major reset in Central Europe after years of tension under Viktor Orban. Magyar said the two countries must go back to normality, talk to each other, and focus on what they have in common. Under Orban, the once close Warsaw-Budapest alliance fractured over Russia, Ukraine, and rule of law disputes. Magyar is trying to rebuild that relationship, but on very different terms. Top of the agenda, Ukraine, EU relations, and energy. On Ukraine, Hungary approved major EU aid for Kyiv, but Orban's government often delayed or threatened to veto sanctions and other key measures in standoffs with Brussels. Tusk will look for signs that Hungary can be a more predictable partner. Magyar promised a reset with Brussels, but Tusk will want to know if that means a genuine shift in Hungary's EU posture or simply a change in tone. Magyar wants frozen EU funds unlocked, critical for Hungary's economy and defense ambitions. On energy, Magyar plans to end Hungary's reliance on Russian supplies by 2035. With Poland emerging as a major regional LNG gateway, new routes could help Hungary diversify, including access to U.S. gas. There was symbolism from the start. Magyar arriving in Warsaw from Krakow by high-speed rail, joking that the line was built with, quote, EU money from the evil Brussels, a pointed jab at Orban's anti-Brussels rhetoric. If this visit delivers, it won't just reset ties, it could redraw Central Europe's political map. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
One of Turkey's largest military exercises is set to conclude on Thursday. Well, the drills have brought together more than 10,000 military personnel from Turkey, NATO allies and partner countries, including Azerbaijan. Here are the details.
The weeks-long FS 2026 joint military exercises are now entering their final stage in western Turkey. The drills, held in Turkey's Aegean region, represent one of the Turkish military's largest combined live-fire exercises. The wide-ranging war games are designed to test coordination between land, air, naval, special forces, and other military units in complex operational scenarios. More than 10,000 military personnel have taken part, including Turkish troops, foreign military units, and observers from more than 40 countries. Forces from several of Turkey's NATO allies have participated in the drills, including Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and the United States. FS 2026 has also included military contingents from Turkey's close partners, including Azerbaijan, Pakistan, and Malaysia. Azerbaijan's participation is especially notable given the close defense relationship between Ankara and Baku. The two countries have expanded military cooperation in recent years, including joint training and defense industrial cooperation under the broader framework of a bilateral strategic alliance. For Turkey, FS 2026 is both a readiness exercise and a diplomatic platform. It allows the Turkish armed forces to demonstrate their operational capabilities while also enhancing interoperability with allies and partner militaries. The live-fire phase of the exercises involved several scenarios, including amphibious operations, air assaults, special forces missions, and coordinated fire support. The drills also give Turkey a chance to showcase its burgeoning defense industry, including domestically produced systems and unmanned platforms. So as FS 2026 wraps up, the message is clear. Turkey is presenting itself as a capable military actor, an important NATO ally, and a key defense partner across multiple regions. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Turkmenistan is considering joining a major regional energy project involving a subsea power cable across the Caspian Sea to export electricity to Azerbaijan and potentially further international markets. A News' Seville Rajapova has the details.
Turkmenistan is studying the possibility of exporting electricity through a subsea cable across the Caspian Sea. The announcement was made by Turkmen-Energo representative Abdullah Jalilov on the sidelines of the World Urban Forum. According to officials, Turkmenistan is currently constructing a 1,574 megawatt combined cycle power plant in Turkmenbashi, which could become the main source of electricity generation for future exports. Jalilov said the proposed cable would allow Turkmenistan to transmit electricity to Azerbaijan and potentially onward to other countries through regional energy networks. He noted that the issue is regularly discussed during intergovernmental meetings between Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan, although no final agreement has yet been reached. Officials say Azerbaijan could play a key transit role in the project, helping deliver Turkmen electricity to wider regional and international markets. According to Turkmen-Energo, the initiative could become economically beneficial for all participating sides, while strengthening regional energy connectivity across the Caspian region. It is Seville Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Kyrgyzstan has suspended the operations of 50 companies in an effort to address businesses facing high sanctions risks. Well, the move comes as the country faces growing pressure from Western partners over concerns it may be helping Russia bypass sanctions. Our correspondent reports now.
Kyrgyzstan is stepping up control over businesses facing high sanctions risks as the country comes under growing pressure from the West. Authorities in Bishkek have suspended the operations of 50 locally registered companies in what officials describe as the first move of its kind. The Justice Ministry says the decision is part of a new system designed to identify high-risk business activity. The names of the companies have not been disclosed, and the sectors involved have also not been revealed. Russia is also not mentioned directly in the official statement. The decision comes as Kyrgyzstan faces increasing questions over allegations that local companies and banks may be helping Russia bypass sanctions imposed over the war in Ukraine. In recent years, concerns over sanctions evasion through Kyrgyz businesses and financial institutions have emerged repeatedly. Pressure on Bishkek increased after the European Union included Kyrgyz lenders Kermet Bank and Capital Bank in its 20th package of sanctions against Russia. Brussels also restricted certain exports to Kyrgyzstan, citing concerns that some goods could eventually reach the Russian market. Kyrgyz authorities insist the country is acting in line with international law and its legal obligations. At the same time, officials have voiced concern over unilateral restrictive measures against third countries. Parisa Kalimurtina, Almaty, A News.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top stories of the day. Do not go away.
Moi, Luis Moreno Campo, déclare solennellement.
We've seen remarkable developments between Baku and Yerevan.
We are against all this kind of peace.
Russia does not want Pashinyan to win. Russia wants perpetual conflict.
Region that's in conflict or in tension is better for their ability to play a role.
Russian oligarchs are less about money and more about political influence. Russia can make its own interventions through online postings.
Que j'ai rempli mes devoirs et exercerai mes attributions de procureur de la Cour pénale internationale.
Money in politics everywhere is corrupting influence, but when it becomes weaponized by a foreign power.
The main thing we have money. Too much resources, too much money.
The main topic is to change Pashinyan.
They have boss and big boss. Big boss is which is in Russia.
L'impartialité et en toute conscience.
We are for pressuring Pashinyan. We are organizing rallies on the streets.
Et que je respecterai le caractère confidentiel des enquêtes.
They are election time. And election time is everything binary.
We're
Innanzitutto que remuevan a Pashinyan.
Welcome back to Primetime. Good to have you with us this evening. The US Senate has advanced a war powers resolution aimed at forcing Donald Trump to end the war in Iran. But unless he receives congressional authorization to continue it. Here's more on that story.
US President Donald Trump has escalated pressure on Iran, warning that the United States could carry out fresh strikes if Tehran refuses to make significant concessions in ongoing negotiations. Trump said he had been close to authorizing a new wave of strikes, but stepped back from the decision. He insisted the conflict would end quickly if a deal is reached, and said oil prices would fall once an agreement is in place.
They end that war very quickly. They want to make a deal so badly. They're tired of this. Should have happened for 47 years. Somebody should have done something about it, and it's going to happen, and it's going to happen fast, and you're going to see oil prices plummet. They're going to come down. There's so much oil out there. They're going to come plummeting down. But even with that, the stock market's at an all-time high.
At a White House briefing, Vice President J.D. Vance said draft agreements continue moving back and forth, but warned the military campaign could resume if diplomacy fails.
Most importantly, who not to call on. We think that we've made a lot of progress. We think the Iranians want to make a deal. The President of the United States has asked us to negotiate in good faith, and that's exactly what we've done. So we're in a pretty good spot here, but there's an option B. And the option B is that we could restart the military campaign to continue to prosecute the case, to continue to try to achieve America's objectives. And we could talk a little bit about what that looks like, but that's not what the president wants, and I don't think it's what the Iranians want either. We have an opportunity here, I think, to reset the relationship that has existed between Iran and the United States for 47 years. That's what the president has asked us to do, and that's what we're going to keep on working at. But it takes two to tango.
In Washington, the US Senate advanced a war powers resolution seeking to limit presidential authority over military operations in Iran. In a narrow procedural vote, 4 Republicans joined Democrats, marking the first time it has moved forward after several failed attempts. The resolution would require congressional approval to continue military action, but it still faces major hurdles in the House and would need a 2/3 majority to survive a presidential veto. The White House says the president's actions are legal as tensions continue between US, Israeli forces and Iran. On the ground, Iran continues to restrict shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, a vital global energy route, while US forces maintain pressure through naval deployments near Iranian waters. Iranian officials have rejected US demands, calling them excessive, and say they will continue to assert their rights over the strategic waterway. The situation remains highly tense, with diplomatic efforts continuing but no clear breakthrough between Washington and Tehran.
Tensions between Russia and NATO countries have intensified after Moscow accused Ukraine of planning drone operations from Baltic territory, a claim firmly rejected by Latvia, Ukraine and the United States. Well, the remarks made at a UN Security Council meeting triggered sharp responses, with Western diplomats warning against threats directed at alliance members.
According to the information we received in Russia, Kyiv has no plans to limit itself to the use of the air corridors provided by the Baltic countries. Drones are also planned for launch from these countries' territories. Zelensky convinced Latvia to agree to the operation, stressing that identifying the exact launch site will be impossible. Drone forces have already been sent to Latvia. They are deployed at the Latvian military bases in Adazi, Ceļa, Lielvārde, Daugavpils and Jēkabpils. I would like to draw attention to all of those who are helping Kyiv and tell them that contemporary intelligence means as such that we can clearly identify drone launch sites. Furthermore, Data can be obtained by studying drone wreckage. When Zelensky made an attempt to attack the Russian president's residence in December. And yes, to the permanent representative of Latvia, the foreign intelligence of Russia did say that the coordinates of decision-making centers in Latvia are well known, and membership in NATO will not protect you from retaliation, even if you are a member of NATO.
I will just repeat, lies and aggressive disinformation and threats are a sign of despair and weakness. And we have seen similar lies addressed against other members of this council in the previous meetings. So I'm very honored to have the attention drawn to my country.
We reject all the fairy tales that we just heard, also about some Ukrainian soldiers in Latvia. Just stop lying.
The EU says it has cleared a key internal hurdle in its trade deal with Washington as both sides try to avoid a fresh tariff escalation. Well, after more than 5 hours of overnight talks, EU officials reached a provisional agreement tied to last year's trade framework with the US. Now, the deal would cut EU duties on American goods, keep US tariffs on most EU products at 15%, and allow Brussels to suspend concessions if Washington fails to honour the agreement.
This was an intensive night. We spent more than 5 hours in negotiations, but I'm glad to say that our third trilogue on the two tariff regulations implementing the EU-US joint statement has concluded with a positive outcome. First, the EU has demonstrated once again that we are a reliable trading partner that honors its commitments. This outcome fully respects the EU-US joint statement. Second, we have agreed on the necessary instruments to ensure that the EU-US joint statement will be implemented faithfully by both sides.
And finally, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says any reduction of US troops in Europe will happen gradually and in a structured way, insisting the move will not affect NATO's defence plans.
Adjustments will take place. The US has to pivot more towards, for example, Asia. This will take place over time in a structured way. What you have clearly heard yesterday from the Supreme Allied Commander, from General Krinkovich, when it comes to this announcement, the 4,000, the 5,000, it is rotational forces, not having an impact on NATO's defence plans.
Well, that is all we have time for tonight on Primetime. Please do come back tomorrow for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.